you should run for the president of the youth group. That's what my Sunday school teacher said to me when I was in 8th grade. A few years later, my pastor said to me, I think you could preach. Why don't you preach on Youth Sunday? I was only 16. When I was in college, an administrator said to me, you know, I think you're very political. I think you'd be good in politics. I argued back. I really was offended by that comment because I saw politics as meaning people who are manipulative of others. In graduate school, a friend told me I was strategic. That's a trait in myself I'd never really seen. And then at my first job after school at the college chapel, my boss said, you're really good at fundraising. Again, something I'd never thought about or recognized. And so what's fascinating in those stories that I remember about my growing up was that each person told me something about myself that I couldn't see. They could spot my genius. I was blind to it. In fact, I even argued against them. And that's the interesting part about genius. Often the biggest reason we don't discover it is because we can't see it. It's often best discovered through other people. Now, what about you? Can you think of a person in your own life who saw your genius and said something to you about it in your life? We really don't forget those people. They have a huge influence. My message today is really about the importance of genius and how we discover it. As I'm referring to genius, it's the thing that you do uniquely well in the world. It's something you do effortlessly. One reason it's hard for us to see our genius is we often say to ourselves, can't everybody do this? One of the genius things about our Swedenborgian tradition is the theology of uses that we read about today. It teaches that we're created to be useful in the world in our own unique and special way. Uses are how we are in service to others. Your greatest use is really your greatest genius. And if you wanted to boil down Swedenborgian theology into a sentence, it would be useful to others. Now, I've resisted the term genius because I find it arrogant and sounding very superior. But if we think of genius in terms of being useful, we realize it's not a boast of our greatness. It's a way of being of service. Stepping into our genius is stepping into our greatest usefulness for humanity. In this way, the failure to tap into your genius means you're failing to live up to your greatest use, which is a loss to the world. We think about it this way, our failure to step into our genius could be our greatest spiritual mistake. The world needs your genius. The fact that genius is found in relationship explains why we often can't see it ourselves and we need to see it through the eyes of others. In the gospel reading today, we have a genius exchange. Jesus asked the disciples, so what are they saying about me? What do they say? They say this, they say that. Well, what do you say I am? Peter says, I think you're the Messiah. I think you're essentially the long-awaited Savior of humanity that's coming into the world. And he recognizes Jesus' genius. Jesus returns the favor. And he recognized Peter's greatness and declares, on this rock I will build my foundation. He becomes the head of the disciples and the head of the church. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church today would argue that the Pope is a descendant of leadership from Peter. So the first step in finding our genius is admitting we have one. That means getting beyond false humility and realizing we've been created for greatness. In fact, the world needs what you have. The second step is realizing others might probably see it better than you, and you might be completely unaware of it. So the trick is, how do we become aware of it, and how do we step into it? What is holding us back? Why is it so hard for us to discover our genius? The answer is that we're often our own worst enemies when it comes to discovering our genius. we thwart ourselves with help from the dark side. The forces of evil have a vested interest in making sure we never achieve our greatness. I'm reminded by this description from Swedenborg of how evil works. They do not fight by arguing against what is good and true. Instead, they pervert what is good and true, setting it aflame with fire of appetites and delusion. Dark forces undermine our genius with phrases that maybe you've heard in your own head. Like, you sound so arrogant. Keep your head down. Chase that dream and you'll be broke. No one pays you to do that. If you live like this, you'll starve. You'll never make a living. Don't get too big for your britches. In the excellent book, which I highly recommend, The Big Leap by author Gay Hendricks, he describes the challenges that we face when we try to make that big leap into our greatness, our genius. The book explains that each of us has a thermostat. I love this analogy, a little thermostat, and it limits our ability to move too far away from where we are now into our genius. You might be aware of this, but you're probably not. So an example of this internal thermostat is that we might have a moment where we really feel in the flow. We really feel like, wow, I can do this effortless. This is awesome. I feel like I'm having a great impact. We can have that moment, and very soon a voice says something like this to us. Well, that was too good to be true. That was a moment, now back to reality. I shouldn't be making this kind of money. I don't deserve to be here. That's our internal thermostat turning, and it's forcing us down to keep us where we are. So the secret of achieving our genius is turning that thermostat so that we can go to a higher level. The book makes the argument that what's holding us back from our genius is our fear of being great. Hendricks explains we spend our life between 4 different zones: incompetence, competence, excellence, and genius. So I'll go through all 4. Incompetence is me urging Ross to let me into his next concert as a violinist. I wouldn't have a clue. Louise just choked on her drink that she was having here as she's watching me say that, because she can't imagine me in that role, and I can't imagine myself. It would be awkward, I'd be embarrassing for Ross, and very likely people would conclude at the end of my performance, don't quit your day job. So there's certain things that we're just completely incompetent at. Competence is doing the work that gets us by. So for years at Church of the Holy City, it was just me kind of doing everything. And I did the newsletter every week. And I am not the design, creative, online guy. I did my best. We got a newsletter out. It was something. And but it was definitely, I was competent, but it was not my joy. It was not effortless. And it took me many more hours than it would take someone who knew what they were doing. Thank God for Katerina, who has made it beautiful and interesting and produces a beautiful newsletter, because that was competent, but it was not really that great. And then there's excellence. That's the next category. Excellence is the trickiest of the 4, I think, because when you do work at this level of being excellent, other people will tell you, you are fantastic, you are great, we can't live without you, only you can do this. But we're not really in the flow. We do it because maybe it pays better or it pays, and we're good at it, and we're better than others, but it's not really our genius. So most of us, if we really evolve, we get stuck, we'll make it to the next level, which is genius. So when we operate at genius, we're working in a space really where no one else can really pull together all the pieces that we pull together in our life, our skill set, and the place that we're serving. That's where we get into our genius, that's where it's effortless, and that's where we're having our greatest impact. But very few of us seem to get there. So how can we break through? Well, we can start by remembering that God created us to live in this greatness. So we can start by praying to God for guidance of how to get to it. And we can ask others to pray for it too. This last week I was doing an interview for a college student who was an atheist, humanist, and he wanted to talk to somebody who believed in religion. He was very puzzled, and he just kept saying, but what's the upside? Like, what's the upside? I don't get it. And it was when I said, my spirituality has made me incredibly strategic in a way I would not be if I didn't. So I get guidance that a person without the angels talking to him wouldn't get. That got his attention. That seemed practical. So we have that ability. We can ask God for guidance on this. We can actually pray about it. I think the next thing to do is find somebody that we know who is living in their genius, if we know anybody, or someone who knows us well, and then do that questioning. What do you think I do really well? In my own life, a few years back, it was actually a conversation with Annabelle. She just pointed out to me at one point, well, you're doing a lot of things in your life now that you're good at, but it's not really what you could be great at. And she pointed out I did a lot of stuff behind the scenes. I put other people up as the genius, and I kind of did the work behind the scenes. And she said, whatever you do next, make sure you put yourself up there. And that was a shift for me. And I realized, yeah, it is safer to be operating in competence, but when you're in genius, you're a little bit more vulnerable. So I was playing myself down. In preparing for today's sermon, I put a quiz in the newsletter. I know you're all thinking, oh, he did? Now, I should report that the failure to read the newsletter is like missing church. It puts your soul in complete jeopardy of going to hell, and you need to understand that. So, but no pressure. I mean, only read it if you like it. But to those who did read it, and I asked for help, they responded with answering 4 questions about my genius. And I want to thank those who did it. And I do want to remind them they will get extra credit for getting into heaven for responding to a newsletter survey. So the responders said similar things. But one stuck out. They said that I had an ability to take complex topics, particularly on spirituality, and simplify them and make them clear. And it was clear that I enjoyed doing it. So they helped me see my genius. Others had specific stories to themselves of a time that I was helpful. In any case, it was a real blessing to read the quiz. Now, one reason I put the quiz in the newsletter was not to check for your eternal salvation. No, the reason I put the quiz into the newsletter was to get some practical feedback for myself, but more importantly, I wanted you to have something that you can copy and send out to 30 people in your life that know you well and ask them to tell you their answers to the questions to see if they can tell you their genius. As I said at the beginning of the sermon, we can often only see our genius through the eyes of others. So ask those that you love and care about and know you well about your genius. The flip side is true too. We should make it a practice of telling people their genius when we see it. This last week, I was with a group of high school students at a conference, and these high school students were very smart. They were genius at 16 and 17 in a way I really couldn't imagine it for me at 16 or 17. But in any case, they were sharing their goals, and it was a civic gathering, and they were sharing their goals and their dreams, and it was clear they were genius, and they had a genius. But what I did is I did take the extra step of listening and saying back to them, it looks like you're really good at this. And you could see their eyes light up. And they looked back at me almost saying, they didn't say it, but it was like, you see it too? Somebody sees it? It was acknowledgement. We can do that, particularly for younger people. Remember at the beginning of the sermon when I share all those stories? Those all happened in my formative years, when it's extremely hard to see yourself outside. So we can really help others by just saying, hey, I don't think you're in your genius, but I think your genius is this. So through today's sermon, I think God is calling you to step up to your higher zone and find your greatest use in the world by leaping into your genius. So will you do something this week that will help you make that move? That's my challenge. A few years back, Marianne Williamson, who is a New Age best-selling author of a book called Return to You, visited Church of the Holy City. She was preparing for her run for the Democratic presidential nomination. Some of you might have attended the event. And I want to close with a quote from her because I think it sums this topic up extremely well. She says this in the book: "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people don't feel insecure around you. You were all meant to shine as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I love that line, your playing small does not serve the world. So let's all get beyond our excuses and step into our genius. Amen.